My blood ran cold when the afternoon sunlight revealed something impossible at the bottom of our drained family pond. The unmistakable silhouette of a small aircraft, its metal frame partially buried in mud, containing a cargo of diamonds worth $90 million and evidence of an international smuggling operation that powerful people had killed to keep hidden for decades. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The summer of 2024 will forever be etched in my memory as the season that nearly destroyed everything my family had built over 5 generations. I'm Ethan Caldwell. My great-great-grandfather, Thomas Caldwell, established Whispering Pines Farm in the rolling hills of western Pennsylvania back in 1902, just as the coal mining industry was transforming our quiet valley into a bustling industrial center. Our 380-acre property had been home to the Caldwell family for 122 years. We'd survived the Great Depression when crop prices collapsed and drought turned our fields to dust. We'd endured 2 world wars, sending 3 generations of Caldwell men to fight while the women kept the farm running. We'd weathered multiple economic recessions, devastating storms, and constant pressure from energy companies wanting to turn our fertile valley into another fracking site. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared us for the financial catastrophe that hit us in 2024. It started on a rainy April morning when my mother, Elizabeth Caldwell, was diagnosed with an aggressive form of lymphoma that required immediate and intensive treatment. I'll never forget the phone call from my father, James, his voice cracking as he delivered the news from the hospital parking lot. At 67, Mom had been the heart of our operation. She was one of those tireless farmers who could fix anything with spare parts and determination, knew every inch of our land by memory, and could predict weather patterns better than any meteorologist on TV. She handled our organic certification, paperwork, maintained relationships with our restaurant clients, and managed the business side of farming that I'd never fully mastered despite growing up on the land. Mom would survive, thank God, but her treatment meant months away from the farm and medical bills that our modest organic produce operation couldn't possibly absorb. The specialized immunotherapy treatment alone cost $250,000, and that was just the beginning. Hospital stays, medications, follow-up appointments, and the home care equipment she needed all added up faster than we could track. The farm had always operated on thin margins. We weren't one of those massive corporate operations you see throughout the Midwest with thousands of acres and computerized harvesting systems. We were what folks call a heritage farm, a working family operation that stayed profitable through careful management, hard work, and an intimate knowledge of our land passed down through generations. My great-great-grandfather Thomas had started with just 60 acres and a small apple orchard. Over the decades, each generation had slowly expanded the operation, adding acreage when neighboring farmers retired or faced their own financial hardships. By the time my grandfather William took over in the 1960s, we had grown to 250 acres. My father, James, had added another 130 acres in the 1990s, taking on debt that had taken him 15 years to pay off. Every acre of our land told a story. The north field, where we grew our heirloom tomatoes, had been added in 1967 when old Frank Mitchell decided to sell and move to Florida. The west orchard, perfect for our award-winning apples, came to us. In 1983, when the Peterson family faced bankruptcy after a series of devastating hailstorms destroyed their crops, the South Meadow, with its natural springs and rich soil, had been the final piece of the puzzle. Acquired in 1995, when my father took what seemed like an enormous risk at the time. But legacy doesn't pay medical bills or equipment loans. By July 2024, we were facing a perfect storm of financial disasters. First, the medical bills had depleted our savings and maxed out our credit. Then our aging irrigation system had failed completely during a record-breaking heat wave, resulting in crop losses that our insurance only partially covered. Finally, our delivery truck, essential for getting our produce to the high-end restaurants that were our best customers, had broken down beyond repair, leaving us scrambling to fulfill orders and maintain our reputation for reliability. "I'm out of ideas, Ethan," my father said one evening as we sat at our weathered kitchen table reviewing the farm's finances for what felt like the 100th time. At 70, Dad looked older than his years, the stress of Mom's illness and our financial troubles etching deep lines in his face. "We've already taken a second mortgage. The bank won't extend any more credit." My wife Laura reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her touch was warm and familiar, a comfort I'd relied on through 12 years of marriage. "Then we need a miracle, Ethan, because I've run the numbers a dozen times. Without selling part of the land, we don't have enough collateral for another loan. And even if we could get an extension, we'd still need to replace the irrigation system and get a new delivery truck." She pulled out a fresh spreadsheet, one I'd seen too many times already. "Look, if we sell just the South Meadow to Robertson Development, 100 acres, we could pay off the medical bills and have enough left over to replace the equipment. We'd still have 280 acres, which is plenty for a smaller operation." I studied the numbers, but my heart wasn't in it. The South Meadow wasn't just acreage. It was the most beautiful part of our property, with gentle hills and natural springs that fed the pond that had been the centerpiece of our farm for generations. It was where I'd learned to swim, where I'd brought Laura on our first date, where we'd taught our children to fish and love the land. "Feels like cutting off a limb," I muttered, pushing the spreadsheet away. It was then that my younger sister, Olivia, called with news that would change everything, though not in the way any of us expected. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Olivia had always been the brilliant one in the family. While I'd stayed on the farm after high school, learning the business from Dad, Olivia had gone to Cornell for a degree in environmental engineering and then to graduate school at Stanford. She'd worked for the Environmental Protection Agency for 9 years, specializing in groundwater management and watershed protection throughout the Appalachian region. At 32, Olivia was everything I wasn't scientifically minded, comfortable with technology and able to see patterns in data that completely escaped me. But she also understood the farm in ways that her education had enhanced rather than replaced. She knew the land not just as a scientist, but as a Caldwell who'd grown up swimming in Cedar Pond and helping with harvests. When she arrived at the farm the next morning, her expression was grim. She climbed out of her government-issued hybrid SUV loaded with testing equipment, wearing her official EPA uniform and carrying a tablet filled with data charts. "Ethan, I need to show you something," she said, leading me towards Cedar Pond with her testing equipment. "I've been tracking the water quality as part of a regional groundwater study. There's been a significant contamination increase over the past 3 months. I think we might be looking at a serious environmental issue that could affect the pond's long-term viability for irrigation." We walked along the familiar path that led from our house to the pond, a route I'd traveled thousands of times over the years. The summer air was heavy with humidity, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the earthy smell of the pond. Birds were singing in the maple trees, and I could hear the gentle lapping of water against the shore. We stood at the edge of the water, where my grandfather's wooden dock extended about 20 feet from shore. The dock was showing its age, the planks were weathered gray, and a few were starting to rot, but it was still structurally sound. I'd been meaning to replace some of the boards, but like everything else, dock maintenance had been pushed aside by more pressing concerns. The pond had always been roughly oval, about 300 feet across at its widest point, with depths reaching nearly 25 feet in the center, where a natural spring bubbled up from underground limestone formations. The water had once been so clear you could see the sandy bottom in the shallow areas near shore and schools of bluegill that Dad had stocked over the years. But lately, it had developed a concerning murky quality. Olivia lowered her water quality meter into the pond, a sophisticated electronic device that looked like a cross between a fishing rod and a laboratory instrument. The natural spring was visible as a gentle upwelling in the center of the pond, a spot where the water moved differently, creating subtle ripples that radiated outward in perfect circles. After several minutes of measurements, she pulled the device up with a frown that deepened as she read the digital display. Contamination levels are up 65% from last year's measurements. Ethan, I think there might be something in the pond that's leaching chemicals into the water. The readings show elevated levels of aviation fuel components and some unusual metal signatures. I stared at her in confusion. Aviation fuel? How would that get into our pond? Olivia shook her head. I don't know. But these readings are concerning, especially if you're using this water for organic crop irrigation. If these levels continue to rise, you could lose your organic certification. Worse, the contamination could spread to the groundwater that feeds your wells. The implications hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Without clean irrigation water, our organic certification would be revoked. That certification was the backbone of our business model, allowing us to command premium prices from the high-end restaurants and farmers markets that bought our produce. More than that, the pond was a major factor in our property's value. Estate appraisers had always cited the natural spring-fed pond as one of our farm's most valuable features. How bad is it? I asked, dreading the answer. Bad enough that you should stop using this water for irrigation immediately, Olivia replied, her expression serious. And I think we need to find the source of the contamination before it gets worse. Could it be runoff from neighboring properties? I asked, thinking of the conventional farms that surrounded us, where pesticides and fertilizers were used liberally. Olivia shook her head. The chemical signature is too specific. This isn't agricultural runoff. These are petroleum distillates and metal compounds typically associated with aircraft. Aircraft? I repeated, baffled by the very suggestion. Our farm was nowhere near an airport. The closest airfield was over 30 miles away. I know it sounds strange, Olivia admitted. But the data is clear. Something related to aviation is contaminating your pond. We spent the rest of the morning testing water samples from different areas of the pond, with Olivia becoming increasingly concerned as each sample confirmed her initial findings. By lunchtime, she had reached a conclusion that would set in motion a chain of events none of us could have anticipated. Ethan, I think we need to drain the pond, she said as we sat on the dock, the summer sun beating down on us. It's the only way to find and remove whatever is causing this contamination. Drain the pond? I repeated, shocked by the suggestion. Cedar Pond had been the heart of our property for as long as I could remember. It provided irrigation water during dry summers, a swimming hole for generations of Caldwell children, and a sanctuary for wildlife. The thought of emptying it felt like sacrilege. I know it's drastic, Olivia acknowledged. But if we don't address the source of this contamination, you could lose your organic certification, and the pollution could spread to your groundwater. The good news is that if we can remove whatever's causing the problem, the spring will naturally refill the pond with clean water. I stared out across the water, watching the ripples from a bullfrog's leap spread in perfect circles. The pond had been here for as long as our family had owned this land. It appeared on the original property deed from 1902. The thought of draining it, even temporarily, felt like a betrayal of our family's history, but Olivia's data was impossible to ignore. If the contamination continued to worsen, we wouldn't just lose our organic certification, we could face EPA fines and potential Liability if the pollution spread to neighboring properties or the regional watershed. How would we even do it? I asked, not quite believing we were having this conversation. I can help coordinate with a professional water management company, Olivia replied. The EPA works with several contractors who specialize in environmental remediation. They have the equipment to drain the pond safely, with minimal impact on the surrounding ecosystem. The water can be filtered and used to irrigate non-food crops, so it won't be wasted. And the cost? I asked, already knowing the answer would be more than we could afford. Olivia hesitated, confirming my fears. It's not cheap, Ethan, but I might be able to get the EPA to cover part of the cost as a contamination investigation. And if we find evidence of illegal dumping, there could be remediation funds available. That evening, I discussed Olivia's findings with Lavra and my father. We sat on our back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, the pond reflecting the colors like a mirror. Do we have any other options? Dad asked, his voice heavy with concern. Not if we want to keep our organic certification, I replied. And according to Olivia, the contamination could eventually reach our wells if we don't address it. Lavra, always the practical one, was already running numbers on her laptop. The water management company Olivia recommended would charge $45,000 for the complete draining and filtering process. That's money we don't have. But if the EPA covers half, we might be able to get a short-term loan for the rest. More debt. Dad sighed, looking out at the pond that had been the backdrop of his entire life. But what choice do we have? The decision to drain Cedar Pond wasn't made lightly. We spent a week researching alternatives, consulting with environmental experts, and exploring potential funding options. But in the end, Olivia's recommendation was the only viable solution if we wanted to save our organic certification and prevent more widespread contamination. 2 weeks later, the water management company arrived. Watershed Restoration Services specialized in environmental remediation and had worked with the EPA on dozens of similar projects. Their lead engineer, Marcus Thompson, was a soft-spoken man with weathered hands and the careful movements of someone who understood the delicate balance of natural systems. "Beautiful piece of water you have here," he said as he surveyed the pond, his experienced eyes noting details I'd never considered. "Natural spring-fed ponds like this are increasingly rare. We'll take every precaution to protect the ecosystem while we work." The draining process would take approximately 3 days, with specialized pumps removing the water in carefully controlled stages to minimize impact on wildlife. Fish would be temporarily relocated to holding tanks, and smaller creatures would be collected and moved to safe areas. The water would be filtered through a complex system that removed contaminants before being used to irrigate our non-food crop fields. The night before the draining began, I couldn't sleep. I stood at our bedroom window at 3 a.m., looking out at the pond illuminated by a full moon. Its surface was like polished silver, reflecting the stars and the silhouettes of the trees that had stood sentinel around it for over a century. "Having second thoughts?" Lavra asked quietly, appearing beside me in her nightgown, her hand slipping into mine. "About 100 of them," I admitted. "That pond has been part of this farm since my great-grandfather's time. Every Caldwell child has learned to swim there. Every drought, it's saved our crops. It feels wrong to empty it, even temporarily. But we're doing it to save the farm," Lavra reminded me. "If we lose our organic certification, we lose everything. Your mom's medical bills aren't going away, and we still need a new irrigation system and delivery truck." She was right, of course. The pond was the heart of our farm, but without the farm itself, the pond was just water. We had to make this sacrifice to preserve the larger legacy that 5 generations of Caldwells had built. The next morning, the watershed restoration team arrived at dawn, their trucks carrying pumps, filtration equipment, and holding tanks for the fish and other aquatic life. Our children, Emma and Liam, had been fascinated by the preparations, but were now staying with Laura's parents in Pittsburgh. We decided it would be easier for them to be away during the draining process, partly for their safety around the heavy equipment, but mostly because we weren't sure how emotional this would be for all of us. Marcus and his team worked with meticulous care, setting up their equipment with the precision of surgeons. 4 massive pumps were positioned strategically around the pond, each connected to an elaborate filtration system that would clean the water before it was piped to our non-food crop fields. "We'll start with the perimeter as," Marcus explained, showing me the detailed plan on his tablet. "That will allow us to collect the fish and other wildlife more easily. Then we'll gradually work toward the center where your spring is located." By mid-morning, the process was underway. The pumps hummed steadily, drawing water from the pond at a carefully controlled rate. A team of biologists waded through the shallows, collecting fish, frogs, and turtles to be temporarily housed in the holding tanks. It was a strange sight watching our beloved pond slowly shrink as its inhabitants were carefully relocated. Dad sat in a lawn chair under a maple tree, observing the process with a mixture of fascination and melancholy. At 70, he had spent his entire life on this farm, and the pond had been a constant presence through all of it. Now he was watching it disappear, not knowing exactly what we would find at the bottom. "My father used to tell stories about this pond," he said, when I brought him a cup of coffee. Said it was deeper than anyone knew, with underground caves and passages that connected to the limestone formations under the valley. Always figured they were just tall tailies to keep us kids from swimming alone. By the end of the first day, the pond had been reduced to about half its normal size. The water level had dropped enough to reveal the upper portions of the underwater landscape, fallen tree branches, rocks, the remnants of an old wooden rowboat that had sunk decades ago. But nothing that would explain the contamination Olivia had detected. As the second day of pumping progressed, the pond continued to shrink, revealing more of its secrets. Old fishing lures snagged on submerged logs. A bicycle that must have been at least 40 years old, its frame encrusted with algae and barnacles. Even the remains of a small wooden dock, different from our current one, that had apparently been built and abandoned generations ago. But it was late in the afternoon, as the water level dropped to reveal the deepest part of the pond near the central spring, that we saw something that made no sense at all. Through the increasingly shallow water, we could make out the unmistakable shape of what appeared to be a small aircraft, its metal frame partially buried in the mud of the pond bottom. "What in the world?" Marcus said, squinting at the emerging shape. "Is that a plane?" Olivia, who had been monitoring the water quality throughout the draining process, stared in disbelief. "That would explain the aviation fuel contamination," she said slowly. "But how did an airplane end up in your pond?" As the pumps continued their work, more of the aircraft became visible. It was small, what pilots would call a single-engine general aviation aircraft, and appeared to have been in the pond for many years, judging by the corrosion and aquatic growth covering its surfaces. By the end of the second day, enough water had been removed that we could see the aircraft was a Beechcraft Bonanza, a high-performance single-engine plane often used for business travel. Its once white surface was now stained with algae and mud, its metal components corroded by years underwater. But remarkably, the fuselage appeared largely intact, protected by the cold, spring-fed waters and the mud that had partially buried it. That night, our farm became the center of intense activity. Olivia had reported the discovery to her superiors at the EPA, who had immediately contacted other federal agencies. By midnight, our quiet country property was illuminated by floodlights. As teams from the EPA, the Federal Aviation Administration, and even the FBI established a perimeter around the drained pond. "This aircraft matches the description of a plane that disappeared in 1989, An FBI agent named Reynolds told us as we sat in our kitchen, surrounded by federal officials. It was reported missing during a flight from Toronto to Philadelphia. The pilot and a passenger were never found, and the plane was presumed to have crashed in Lake Erie. How could it end up in our pond? I asked, trying to make sense of the impossible. Our farm was nowhere near the flight path from Toronto to Philadelphia, and certainly not anywhere near Lake Erie. That's what we need to find out, Agent Reynolds replied grimly, because this wasn't just any flight. The passenger was a courier for a major diamond dealer, carrying a case of uncut diamonds valued at approximately $15 million in 1989 currency. Lovra gasped, "Diamonds? In our pond?" "If they're still in that plane," Reynolds continued, "they'd be worth close to $90 million today." The revelation was staggering. A missing plane carrying a fortune in diamonds had somehow ended up at the bottom of our family pond, where it had remained hidden for 35 years. It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was right there, emerging from the water as the pumps continued their work through the night. As the third day of draining began, the pond was nearly empty. Only a foot of water remained above the muck and mud of the bottom, and the aircraft sat fully exposed, a bizarre time capsule from another era. Federal agents in wetsuits and protective gear carefully approached the plane, documenting every detail with photographs and measurements before attempting to open it. The moment they breached the cabin door was one I'll never forget. After 35 years underwater, the interior of the plane was in remarkable condition, preserved by the cold spring water and the anaerobic environment of the mud. And there, secured to a seat with what had once been a standard safety belt, was a metal briefcase bearing the logo of Van Hoven Diamond Merchants, one of the world's most prestigious diamond dealers. The case was intact, its special waterproof seals having protected its contents from the pond water for 3.5 decades. When the FBI forensics team carefully opened it, wearing specialized gloves and working under portable lights set up around the drained pond, the contents sparkled even in their rough, uncut state. Hundreds of diamonds, ranging from the size of a grain of rice to some as large as a grape, filled the custom-designed interior of the case. $87,400,000 at current market value, announced the gemologist, who had been flown in to authenticate the find. All accounted for according to the original manifest. But the diamonds were only the beginning of what the plane would reveal. Because as federal investigators continued to examine the aircraft and its contents, they discovered something that would turn our family's simple pond drainage into the center of an international investigation and put our lives in danger. Behind a panel in the plane's cabin, they found another case. This one contained documents, logbooks, photographs, and handwritten notes that had been sealed in waterproof military-grade containers. Documents that detailed one of the largest diamond smuggling operations of the 1980s, with connections to organized crime families in 3 countries, and most explosively, the names of government officials who had been paid to look the other way. These documents implicate some very powerful people, Agent Reynolds told us that evening, his expression grave. People who have spent the last 35 years believing that all evidence of their involvement disappeared with this plane. People who would kill to keep these secrets buried. As night fell on the third day of draining Cedar Pond, our farm was transformed from a peaceful agricultural operation into what resembled a federal crime scene. Floodlights illuminated the empty pond basin where teams of investigators continued to document every aspect of the aircraft and its contents. Armed FBI agents patrolled the perimeter of our property, while satellite trucks from various government agencies crowded our driveway. Our family sat in the kitchen, trying to process the magnitude of what had been hidden beneath our pond for almost 4 decades. A fortune in diamonds. Evidence of international crime. Secrets that powerful people had killed to protect. And somehow, it had all ended up on our farm, in the pond where generations of Caldwell children had learned to swim. How could a plane crash into our pond without anyone noticing? Lavra asked, voicing the question we'd all been wondering. Agent Reynolds, who had been coordinating with various agencies throughout the day, offered the explanation their preliminary investigation had uncovered. According to weather records from 1989, the night this plane disappeared, your area experienced one of the worst thunderstorms in decades. Nearly 8 inches of rain fell in a 6-hour period, causing widespread flooding and power outages. We believe the pilot, who was attempting to avoid detection by flying without lights and off recognized flight paths, became disoriented in the storm and crashed into your pond. But wouldn't we have heard the crash? My father asked. I was here in 1989. I don't remember anything like that. During a storm of that magnitude, with thunder and wind? Unlikely, Reynolds replied. And the plane was small. It didn't explode on impact. The water would have cushioned the crash. By morning, it would have been completely submerged in the deepest part of your pond. It was a plausible explanation, but it still felt surreal, the idea that for my entire adult life, I had swum and fished in a pond that concealed not only a plane crash, but a fortune in diamonds and evidence of international crime. As we struggled to comprehend what this meant for our farm and our family, Agent Reynolds delivered another bombshell. We've identified the pilot and passenger, he said, sliding photographs across our kitchen table. The pilot was Michael Donovan, a former military aviator who had been working as a private contractor for various clients, some with known criminal connections. The passenger was Anton Kleiner, officially listed as a courier for Van Hoven diamond merchants, but we now believe he was a key figure in a diamond smuggling operation with ties to organized crime. But the real problem, Reynolds continued, his expression darkening, is the third person on the manifest. Third person? Olivia asked, looking up from the water quality data she had been reviewing. I thought you said there were only 2 people on the plane. Officially, yes, Reynolds nodded. But these documents indicate there was a third passenger, a federal witness who was about to testify against several high-ranking government officials involved in the smuggling operation. A witness who disappeared just before he was scheduled to appear before a grand jury. The implications were chilling. This wasn't just about diamonds or smuggling. It was potentially about murder and a decades-old cover-up that reached into the highest levels of government. The working theory, Reynolds explained, is that the crash was no accident. Donovan was likely paid to eliminate the witness and make it look like an accident over Lake Erie, where recovery would be nearly impossible. But something went wrong, maybe the storm, maybe mechanical failure, and they crashed here instead. And the current contamination? Olivia asked. The aviation fuel that led us to drain the pond in the first place? The aircraft's fuel tanks remained remarkably intact for decades, Reynolds explained. But in the last few years, corrosion finally breached the tanks, allowing fuel and hydraulic fluids to leak into your pond. In a way, it's fortunate. Without that contamination, this plane and all its evidence might have remained hidden for another 35 years. As the night deepened and federal agents continued their work at the pond, our family tried to grasp how our lives had been turned upside down in just 3 days. We had drained our pond to save our organic certification and perhaps find the source of some minor contamination. Instead, we had uncovered a decades-old crime scene that implicated powerful people who had believed their secrets were safely hidden. What happens now? I asked Reynolds as the clock approached midnight. To the diamonds? To the evidence? To our farm? The FBI agent's answer would prove to be both a blessing and a curse, the beginning of a chapter in our family story that would test us in ways we never could have imagined. The diamonds and evidence will be secured and transported to federal facilities for further analysis, he said. Your farm is now a federal crime scene, which means limited access until our investigation is complete. And your family, he paused, his expression grave. Your family just became key witnesses in a case that some very dangerous people have spent 35 years trying to bury. As I looked out the kitchen window at the floodlights illuminating our drained pond and the aircraft that had brought such dangerous secrets to our land, I realized that our financial crisis, the medical bills, the broken equipment, the threat of losing our organic certification now seemed almost trivial compared to the danger we faced. We had drained our pond hoping to save our farm. Instead, we had uncovered secrets that would put our very lives at risk. My phone buzzed with an alert at 2:37 a.m., jarring me awake from a fitful sleep. The text message from Agent Reynolds was brief but urgent. Security breach at perimeter. Stay inside. Doors locked. Teams responding. I immediately woke Laura, and we moved quickly to check that all windows and doors were secure. Through our bedroom window, I could see additional floodlights illuminating the farm's perimeter as armed agents moved with tactical precision toward the western boundary of our property. The night was split by the sharp crack of gunfire, 3 distinct shots followed by the shouts of federal agents. "What's happening?" Lavra whispered, her voice tight with fear as she peered through the curtains. Before I could answer, Agent Reynolds called. "Mr. Caldwell, we've apprehended 2 armed individuals attempting to access the pond area. We believe they were sent to retrieve or destroy evidence from the aircraft. Is your family secure?" "We're all inside," I confirmed, my heart pounding. "My father, Olivia, Lavra, and me." "Stay there. We're sending additional agents to secure the house." Within minutes, our farmhouse was surrounded by FBI personnel, their weapons drawn as they established a protective perimeter. Agent Reynolds arrived shortly after, his expression grim as he briefed us in our kitchen. "The individuals we captured are professional contractors with known connections to international criminal organizations," he explained. "They were carrying specialized equipment for underwater recovery operations and enough explosives to destroy the aircraft completely." "How did they know about the plane?" Olivia asked, her scientific calm giving way to visible concern. "That's what worries us," Reynolds replied. "The official report of your discovery is still classified. Only a handful of people outside this investigation should know about it, which suggests we have a security breach or someone connected to the original crime as intelligence sources monitoring federal communications." The realization was chilling. Less than 24 hours after the plane's discovery, dangerous people had already attempted to access our property, people willing to use violence to protect secrets that had been hidden for 35 years. "We need to move your family to a secure location immediately," Reynolds continued. "Pack essential items for at least 2 weeks. A helicopter will be here in 30 minutes to transport you to a federal safe house." "Leave the farm?" my father protested, his weathered hands gripping the edge of the kitchen table. "Who will take care of the crops, the livestock? We're in the middle of harvest season." Reynolds' expression softened slightly. "Mr. Caldwell, I understand your concern, but this is a matter of life and death. The people behind this will not hesitate to eliminate witnesses. We've arranged for a team from the Department of Agriculture to maintain essential farm operations while you're away. Your safety has to be the priority now." As we hurriedly packed bags, the reality of our situation began to sink in. We weren't just witnesses to a discovery. We had become targets in a decades-old criminal conspiracy. Our peaceful farm, the legacy of 5 generations, had transformed overnight into the epicenter of a dangerous federal investigation. The helicopter arrived precisely on schedule, landing in our east field where agents had set up temporary landing lights. As we boarded, I looked back at our farmhouse, its white clapboard siding glowing in the floodlights, the drained pond beyond it now surrounded by federal vehicles and equipment. I couldn't help wondering if we would ever see our home the same way again. The safe house was a secluded property in the Allegheny Mountains, About 2 hours from our farm by road, but only 30 minutes by helicopter. It looked like an ordinary vacation home from the outside. A large log cabin surrounded by pine trees, but the security measures were anything but ordinary. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter. Advanced surveillance systems monitored every approach, and bulletproof glass had been installed in all windows. "You'll be comfortable here while we continue our investigation," Agent Reynolds assured us as a team of FBI staff showed us to our rooms. "We'll provide daily updates on the situation at your farm and the progress of our investigation." That first morning at the safe house, we gathered in the main living area where Reynolds had set up a secure video conference with the investigative team at our farm. The images on the screen were startling. Our drained pond had been transformed into something resembling an archaeological dig, with sections carefully gridded off and teams of specialists working methodically around the aircraft. "The recovery operation is proceeding on schedule," reported Dr. Eleanor Vasquez, the forensic archaeologist leading the excavation. "We've fully documented the aircraft's position and begun the process of recovering human remains." "Human remains?" Lavra gasped, her hand finding mine. Dr. Vasquez nodded solemnly. "We've identified 3 distinct sets of remains in and around the aircraft. Preliminary examination suggests violent trauma inconsistent with a simple crash landing. In layman's terms, at least one of these individuals appears to have been executed before the plane hit the water." The clinical description couldn't mask the horror of what she was saying. Our peaceful family pond had been the site of a murder, and the final resting place of 3 people for over 3 decades. "The diamonds have been secured and transported to a federal facility for analysis and authentication," Reynolds added. "But the documents are proving to be even more valuable than we initially thought. They contain detailed records of a smuggling operation that moved not just diamonds, but also weapons and classified technology throughout the 1980s. Most significantly," he continued, "they include names, dates, bank accounts, and meeting locations implicating government officials from 3 countries, including 7 former or current U.S. officials, some of whom remain in positions of considerable influence today." The scale of the conspiracy was difficult to comprehend. What had started as a desperate measure to save our farm draining a contaminated pond had uncovered a criminal network reaching into the highest levels of government and spanning multiple decades. As the briefing continued, the implications became even more serious. The ballistics analysis from the recovered remains indicated that specialized ammunition had been used, the kind typically associated with intelligence agencies rather than common criminals. The documents included coded references to executive sanction for certain operations, suggesting official approval from government entities. "This isn't just smuggling or organized crime," Reynolds explained. "We're looking at potential state-sponsored criminal activity with elements of our own government possibly involved. That's why the security around your family and this investigation is so extensive." By the end of the first week in protective custody, the strain was beginning to show on all of us. My father paced the safe house like a caged animal, constantly asking when he could return to tend his crops. Olivia buried herself in the scientific reports from the investigation, trying to maintain professional detachment even as the implications grew more disturbing. Lavra tried to keep spirits up by organizing family game nights and cooking elaborate meals in the well-equipped kitchen, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. I spent hours on the secure phone line with the Department of Agriculture team managing our farm, providing detailed instructions on irrigation schedules, pest management, and harvest priorities. They were competent professionals, but they didn't know our land like we did, couldn't feel the subtle differences in soil moisture that told you exactly when the tomatoes needed water or recognized the early signs of fungal issues in the apple orchard. Our isolation was broken on the 8th day when Reynolds arrived with news that would further complicate our already impossible situation. "The media has gotten hold of the story," he announced. showing us the front page of the Washington Post. The headline read, "Plane with $90 million in diamonds found on family farm, government corruption alleged." Below was an aerial photograph of our drained pond and the excavation site, along with a family picture of us that must have been pulled from our farm's website. "How did they get this information?" Olivia demanded. "I thought the investigation was classified." "It was," Reynolds confirmed grimly. "But as I suspected, we have a security breach. Someone with access to the investigation has leaked details to the press, likely someone connected to the officials implicated in the documents, trying to control the narrative before we can complete our investigation." The media coverage exploded. Over the next 48 hours, every major news outlet carried this story, each with slightly different details, but all featuring our family prominently. Our farm became famous overnight, with satellite trucks parked along the rural roads surrounding our property and reporters attempting to interview our neighbors and local townspeople. Social media was even worse. Conspiracy theories proliferated, ranging from claims that we had orchestrated the entire discovery as a publicity stunt to accusations that our family had been involved in the original smuggling operation. Old photos of our family appeared online, analyzed and dissected by amateur sleuths trying to connect us to the events of 1989. "This complicates your security situation significantly," Reynolds explained during an emergency briefing. "Your identities are now public knowledge, which means protective custody becomes more challenging. We're implementing additional security protocols and accelerating our timeline for witness statements and evidence processing." On the 10th day, Reynolds arrived with a legal team from the Justice Department. "We need your formal statements about the discovery," he explained. "Every detail, from the moment your sister first detected the contamination to the recovery of the aircraft. These statements will be sealed, but they may eventually be used in federal prosecutions." For hours we recounted every aspect of our experience, Olivia's water testing, our decision to drain the pond, the first glimpse of the aircraft emerging from the muddy bottom. The lawyers recorded everything, occasionally stopping us to clarify technical details or establish precise timelines. "What happens next?" I asked when the statements were complete. "How long do we stay in protective custody? When can we return to our farm?" The lead attorney, a serious woman named Ms. Harrington, exchanged glances with Reynolds before responding. "That's complicated, Mr. Caldwell. The investigation has expanded significantly. We're now looking at potential charges against several high-ranking officials, including 2 currently serving in government positions. The diamonds have been definitively linked to a major theft from a South African mine in 1988, which adds international dimensions to the case." "You didn't answer my question," I pressed. "When can we go home?" "We're looking at a minimum of 2 more weeks in protective custody," Reynolds said. "After that, we'll reassess the security situation. But I need to be honest with you, your farm is still an active crime scene, and likely will be for several more weeks. And even when you can return, your lives will be different. The people implicated in this case have resources and connections. They won't simply disappear because we've discovered their crimes." The reality of our situation hit me with full force. We had drained our pond to save our farm from financial ruin and environmental contamination. Instead, we had uncovered secrets that threaten not just our livelihood, but our very lives. That night, unable to sleep, I stepped onto the safe house's back deck where my father sat alone, staring up at the stars. At 70, he suddenly looked much older, the weight of our circumstances etched into the lines of his face. "I've been thinking about your great-grandfather," he said without turning. "About what he would make of all this." I sat beside him, the mountain air cool against my skin. "What do you mean?" "Thomas Caldwell bought that land because he believed in building something that would last," Dad continued. "Something that would feed people, that would connect generations. He used to say that farming wasn't just about crops, it was about cultivating legacy. He finally turned to me, his eyes reflecting the starlight. I wonder what kind of legacy we're cultivating. Now with diamond smugglers and government conspiracies, and our family in hiding. I had no answer. The same questions had been haunting me since we'd left the farm. Had our discovery destroyed the very thing we were trying to save? Had the effort to preserve our family's legacy instead placed it in greater jeopardy than the financial crisis ever could? The next morning brought unexpected visitors to the safe house, Laura's parents, who had been caring for our children in Pittsburgh. FBI agents had arranged their secure transport after determining that the entire family would be safer together under one protected roof. The reunion with Emma and Liam was emotionally overwhelming. At 11 and 8, they'd only been told that there was a situation at the farm requiring us to be away temporarily. Now, seeing armed guards and their parents living in a secure facility, their confusion and fear were palpable. "Is our house okay?" Emma asked, her young face serious with concern. "Mrs. Peterson at school said she saw our farm on the news. She said you found treasure in our pond. How do you explain to children that their home has become the center of an international criminal investigation? That the pond where they learned to swim contained not just fish and frogs, but murder victims and smuggled diamonds?" Laura handled it with remarkable grace, explaining that we had found something important in the pond that was helping the government solve a very old mystery. She emphasized that we were safe, that the farm was being well cared for, and that we would go home as soon as possible. "Like a treasure hunt?" Liam asked, his eyes wide with excitement that cut through the tension. "Something like that," Laura smiled, though her eyes met mine with shared concern. Their presence changed the atmosphere of the safe house, bringing noise and energy and a reminder of why we needed to find a way through this impossible situation. For them, we had to ensure there would still be a farm to return to, still a legacy to inherit. On the 14th day of protective custody, Reynolds arrived with news that would reshape our understanding of everything that had happened. "We've identified the third victim," he announced, laying photographs on the table. His name was Richard Bennett, a former intelligence operative who had been providing information about the diamond smuggling operation to federal investigators. He was scheduled to testify before a grand jury on April 15, 1989, 3 days after the plane disappeared. "So he was silenced," Olivia said quietly. "Yes, but that's not the most significant discovery," Reynolds continued. "Bennett wasn't just any witness. He was connected to your family." The statement hung in the air, incomprehensible. "What do you mean, connected to our family?" I finally managed. Reynolds slid another photograph across the table, an old Polaroid showing a group of people at what appeared to be a county fair in the early 1980s. In the center stood a much younger version of my father, and beside him, a man who resembled the photograph of Richard Bennett. "This was found among Bennett's personal effects that were stored in a long-term evidence locker," Reynolds explained. On the back it says, "James and Me, Harvest Festival, 1982. My father stared at the photograph, his face pale. "Rick," he whispered. "Rick Bennett. He was a friend, someone I knew from agricultural extension meetings. He visited the farm a few times in the early 80s. Said he was researching sustainable farming practices. He was using that as his cover," Reynolds explained gently. Bennett was actually monitoring several rural properties in Pennsylvania that intelligence services believed were being used as temporary storage sites for smuggled goods. Your farm was never under suspicion, but it provided him with legitimate reasons to be in the area. The implications were staggering. The witness who had died in our pond had been my father's friend. The plane hadn't crashed on our property. By random chance during a storm, Bennett had likely directed the pilot toward our farm when he realized he was in danger, hoping to reach people he trusted. "There's more," Reynolds continued. "The leak to the media wasn't random either. We've identified the source, a junior staff member at the Justice Department who was being blackmailed by individuals connected to the original conspiracy. They specifically highlighted your family in the story because of Bennett's connection. They're trying to construct a narrative that your family has been involved from the beginning. That's absurd, Lavra protested. James didn't even know what his friend really did. We know that, Reynolds assured her. But they're trying to muddy the waters, create doubt about the evidence. More importantly, they're trying to discredit you as witnesses by suggesting you've known about the plane all along. The strategy was as clever as it was ruthless. If they could convince the public, or even just create reasonable doubt, that our family had been aware of the plane's location for years, perhaps even complicit in its concealment, then the evidence it contained would be compromised. Our discovery would appear staged rather than accidental, the documents potentially altered or fabricated. So what do we do now? I asked, trying to process this new layer of complexity. We accelerate everything, Reynolds replied. We've received approval for an emergency grand jury. The U.S. Marshals Service is preparing a more comprehensive witness protection plan for your family. And we're bringing in additional security teams to prepare for the possibility of more direct threats. Witness protection. The words hung in the air like a death sentence for everything we had built. Witness protection would mean new identities. Relocation, abandoning the farm and the legacy of 5 generations of Caldwells. No, my father said firmly, speaking for the first time since seeing the photograph. I won't leave the farm. I won't let these people take everything we've built. Mr. Caldwell, Reynolds began, his tone gentle but firm. The people involved in this conspiracy have already proven they're willing to kill to protect their secrets. They have resources, connections, and government. I don't care, my father interrupted. That land has been in our family for over a century. It survived world wars, the Depression, floods, and droughts. I won't be the one to abandon it because of criminals and corrupt officials. His determination ignited something in all of us, a stubborn refusal to be driven from our home, our heritage, our purpose. There has to be another way, I insisted. A way to ensure our safety without abandoning everything we've built. Reynolds studied us thoughtfully, recognizing the resolve in our expressions. Let me make some calls, he finally said. There might be alternatives, but they would require significant cooperation from your family and acceptance of certain limitations and security measures. Later that evening, he returned with what he called Option B, a comprehensive security plan that would allow us to return to the farm under continuous federal protection. The property would be equipped with advanced surveillance systems. A team of U.S. Marshals would maintain a constant presence, and our public movements would be limited and monitored. It's not ideal, Reynolds admitted. Your lives would be restricted, your privacy limited. But you would be on your land, able to maintain your operations while the investigation and subsequent prosecutions proceed. How long would this last? Lavra asked, the practical one as always. Until all threats are neutralized, Reynolds replied. Major federal prosecutions can take years, especially in cases involving government officials. We're looking at a minimum of 18 months, possibly much longer. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was one we could live with literally. We would be home, on our land, preserving the legacy that 5 generations had built. The farm would survive, even if our daily lives would be dramatically different. There's one more thing you should know, Reynolds added. The diamonds recovered from the plane are officially considered evidence in a federal investigation. However, under certain statutes related to recovered property, your family may have a legitimate claim to a finder's fee, typically a percentage, of the value of recovered goods after the case is resolved. What kind of percentage? Olivia asked. In cases like this, between 10 and 15% of the market value, Reynolds replied, which would amount to approximately $9 to $13 million. The figure was astounding enough to pay off my mother's medical bills many times over, replace every piece of equipment on the farm, and secure our financial future for generations. But it came with moral complications that none of us had anticipated when we'd made the decision to drain our pond. That money comes from smuggling, my father said quietly. From the same operation that got Rick killed. It feels tainted. Perhaps, Reynolds acknowledged. But consider this, that money could secure your farm's future. It could be used to establish conservation easements that would protect your land from development forever. It could fund agricultural scholarships or sustainable farming initiatives. The origin may be tainted, but the use doesn't have to be. As we discussed the implications late into the night, a new vision began to emerge, not just of surviving this crisis, but of transforming it into something meaningful. If we received the finder's fee, we could establish the Bennett Memorial Agricultural Trust, dedicated to preserving family farms and promoting sustainable practices throughout Pennsylvania. We could ensure that our land would remain agricultural in perpetuity, protected from developers and energy companies forever. The discovery that had threatened everything we valued could instead become the means of preserving it, not just for our family, but for future generations of farmers throughout the region. The next morning, we informed Reynolds of our decision. We would accept option B, returning to our farm under federal protection while the investigation and prosecutions proceeded. We would cooperate fully with all security measures and limitations. And if we eventually received a finder's fee for the diamonds, we would use it to establish a trust dedicated to agricultural preservation and sustainable farming education. It won't be easy, Reynolds warned. Your lives will be disrupted in ways you can't fully anticipate. The media attention will be intense. The legal proceedings will be lengthy and stressful. And the security threats may continue for years. We understand, I replied, speaking for our family. But the farm is worth it. The legacy is worth it. 2 days later, a convoy of unmarked vehicles transported us back to Whispering Pines Farm, now transformed by security fencing, surveillance, equipment, and the continuous presence of federal agents. Our drained pond remained an active crime scene, surrounded by temporary structures housing forensic equipment and investigation teams. As we approached the farmhouse, I was struck by the strange juxtaposition of the familiar and the alien hour. White clapboard homes surrounded by armed guards, our fields being tended by Department of Agriculture specialists, our peaceful country property now the center of what Reynolds had called one of the most significant corruption investigations of the decade. But despite the changes, despite the disruption and danger and uncertainty, we were home. Standing on our front porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of orange and purple, I felt a profound sense of connection to the land and to the generations of Caldwells who had faced their own challenges to preserve this place. We had drained our pond hoping to save our farm from financial ruin and environmental contamination. Instead, we had uncovered secrets that had placed everything at risk. But through that same discovery, we had found a way to secure our legacy. For generations to come, not just our family's legacy, but a broader legacy of agricultural preservation and sustainability. As darkness fell on our first night back home, I walked to the edge of the drained pond, now illuminated by security lighting and surrounded by investigation equipment. The aircraft had been carefully removed for further analysis, leaving only the carefully documented excavation site where it had rested for 35 years. Soon, the forensic teams would complete their work. The pond would be remediated to remove all traces of contamination. The spring would once again fill the basin with clear, clean water. Fish would return, plants would grow, and life would continue its cycle. Our pond would heal, just as our family would heal from this unexpected and dangerous chapter in our history. Different perhaps, but still intact. Still ours. Still home. Agent Reynolds joined me at the pond's edge, his expression thoughtful, as he surveyed the excavation site. Your family's decision to stay was brave, he said quietly. Most people would have taken the easier path: new identities, relocation, a fresh start somewhere safe. We're farmers, I replied simply. This land isn't just property to us. It's who we are, it's what we pass on. He nodded, understanding what I meant, even if he couldn't fully feel the connection that tied us to this place across generations. The first grand jury indictments will be announced tomorrow, he said. 7 current and former officials, 3 executives from mining companies, and 4 individuals connected to organized crime families. It's just the beginning, but it's a start. Justice would come, slowly but inevitably. The truth hidden in our pond for 35 years would finally be acknowledged. And our family would be there to witness it, rooted in the land that had revealed secrets beyond anything we could have imagined. When we made the desperate decision to drain our beloved cedar pond, the morning dawned crisp and clear, a perfect September day that belied the chaos surrounding our farm. Federal agents moved with practiced efficiency around the property, changing shifts and checking surveillance equipment, while pretending to be part of our normal agricultural operation. To any distant observer, they might have looked like farm workers if you ignored their tactical gear partially concealed under work clothes and the communication devices in their ears. I stood on our front porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the sunrise paint the eastern sky in brilliant gold and orange. It had been 6 weeks since our return to Whispering Pines Farm under federal protection. 6 weeks of adjusting to our new reality of constant surveillance, security protocols, and the continuous presence of investigators still processing evidence from the aircraft we'd discovered. "Beautiful morning," said Agent Sofia Martinez, the U.S. Marshal who had been assigned as our family's primary security coordinator. In her early 40s, with keen eyes that missed nothing, Martinez had quickly earned our trust with her no-nonsense approach and genuine concern for our family's well-being. "Perfect harvesting weather," I agreed, nodding toward the east fields where our organic tomatoes were reaching peak ripeness. "We need to get those tomatoes to the restaurant clients by tomorrow. They won't wait." Martinez consulted her tablet. "We've cleared the delivery route and vetted the receiving staff at each location. 2 agents will accompany your truck, posing as farm employees. Standard security protocols will be in effect." This was our new normal, every movement off the farm carefully planned and secured, every visitor thoroughly screened, every delivery route analyzed for potential security threats. The grand jury indictments announced 6 weeks earlier had sent shockwaves through political and business circles, resulting in the arrests of several high-profile individuals connected to the diamond smuggling operation and subsequent cover-up. But those arrests had only increased the danger to our family. Those still free, those with the most to lose, had grown more desperate as the investigation tightened around them. 2 weeks earlier, federal agents had intercepted a professional assassin who had been tracking my movements, planning to make my death appear as a farming accident. 3 days after that, they had discovered sophisticated listening devices planted in trees along our property line. The threats were real and continuous, but we had refused to be driven from our land. Instead, we had adapted, integrating security measures into our daily operations and finding ways to continue our agricultural business despite the restrictions. Laura joined us on the porch, handing me a list of harvest priorities for the day. At her insistence, we had resumed homeschooling Emma and Liam, keeping them on the farm where they could be properly protected while continuing their education. She had transformed our rarely used formal dining room into a classroom, complete with educational posters, computer stations, and a small science lab. "The children want to help with the tomato harvest this afternoon," she said, her tone making it clear this wasn't just a request, but something she considered important. "They need to feel normal, to participate in farm activities despite everything." "That's happening." Martinez considered this, weighing security concerns against psychological needs. "We can set up a controlled harvesting area in the southeast section," she finally decided. Close to the house, easily monitored, with 3 agents positioned around the perimeter, 2 hours maximum. These negotiations had become routine, balancing our family's need to function as farmers and parents against the security requirements. That kept us alive. Martinez understood that protecting us meant more than just physical safety. It meant preserving the core activities that defined us as a family and as stewards of the land. My father emerged from the barn, accompanied by Agent Reynolds, who had remained the FBI's lead investigator on the case. Now in his 3rd month, living primarily at our farm, Reynolds had developed a genuine appreciation for agricultural life, often joining Dad for early morning chores and listening attentively to his stories about the land's history. We've received the preliminary report from the environmental remediation team, Reynolds announced as they approached the porch. The pond basin has been fully decontaminated. All traces of aviation fuel and hydraulic fluids have been removed from the soil. The natural spring is flowing clear again, and water quality tests show no remaining contamination. It was the first genuinely good news we'd received in weeks. The pond, the heart of our property for over a century, could finally begin healing. How soon can we refill it? I asked, already calculating how the restored pond would affect our irrigation capacity for next season. The forensic teams need another 2 weeks to complete their documentation, Reynolds replied. After that, the basin can be prepared for refilling. The spring should restore normal water levels within a month, depending on flow rates. My father's expression lightened for the first time in days. Cedar Pond had been his childhood swimming hole, his favorite fishing spot, the place where he had taught each grandchild to appreciate the delicate balance of aquatic ecosystems. Its restoration represented something profound, a symbol that despite everything that had happened, our land could heal. There's something else you should know, Reynolds continued, his tone shifting. The Justice Department has scheduled a press conference for this afternoon. They're going to announce new indictments resulting from evidence found in the aircraft, including charges against Senator Howard Blackwood. The name sent a chill through me. Senator Blackwood was not just any politician, he was the chairman of the powerful Senate Appropriations Committee, with decades of influence in Washington and deep connections throughout the government. More significantly, his family's mining company had been implicated in the original diamond theft from the South African mine in 1988. How solid is the evidence? I asked, knowing that taking on someone of Blackwood's stature would intensify the danger to our family exponentially. Ironclad, Reynolds replied with grim satisfaction. The documents recovered from the plane include signed authorizations from Blackwood, then Justice Department official diverting federal investigations away from his family's company. There are also financial records showing payments to the pilot, Michael Donovan, authorized directly by Blackwood. The implications were staggering. A sitting U.S. senator had been directly involved in diamond smuggling, obstruction of justice, and potentially the murder of a federal witness, a witness who had been my father's friend. You understand what this means, Martinez interjected, her expression serious. When these charges become public, security concerns will escalate significantly. Blackwood has powerful allies and considerable resources. We'll need to implement enhanced protocols immediately. Enhanced protocols meant even more restrictions on our movements, additional security personnel, and possibly temporarily relocating my mother, who had completed her cancer treatment and was recovering at my sister's home in Philadelphia. It meant further disruption to our already strained farming operations and additional stress on our children, who had been remarkably resilient, but were showing signs of the psychological toll of living under constant threat. But what choice did we have? The evidence had been found on our property, in our pond. Our family had become inextricably linked to one of the most significant political corruption cases in recent history. We couldn't walk away from that responsibility, even if we had wanted to. That afternoon, we gathered in the living room to Watch the Justice Department press conference on television. Attorney General Eleanor Williams stood at a podium flanked by FBI officials, her expression solemn as she announced the indictment of Senator Howard Blackwood on charges of racketeering, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit murder, and international smuggling violations. These indictments result from extraordinary evidence recovered during an ongoing investigation, she stated, carefully avoiding any mention of our family or the specific location where the evidence had been found. The Department of Justice is committed to following this evidence wherever it leads, regardless of the power or position of those involved. The press conference triggered an immediate political earthquake. Cable news networks switched to continuous coverage of the developing scandal. Blackwood's office issued a vehement denial, claiming political persecution. Congressional allies questioned the timing and motivation of the indictments. But most concerning were the subtle threats embedded in statements from Blackwood's legal team, references to so-called witnesses whose credibility would be thoroughly examined, and alleged evidence that would be challenged at every level. They were signaling their intention to attack us, to discredit our family and our accidental discovery in an attempt to undermine the case against Blackwood. Reynolds turned off the television, his expression grim. Blackwood will surrender to federal authorities tomorrow morning, but that doesn't diminish the threat. His organization extends far beyond his personal involvement. We need to prepare for significant countermeasures from his allies. The farm transformed overnight into what resembled a military installation. Additional security teams arrived, establishing new perimeter checkpoints and deploying advanced surveillance technology. Our internet and phone communications were routed through secure federal servers to prevent monitoring or interception. Even our farm equipment was inspected for tracking devices or explosives before each use. 3 days after Blackwood's indictment, the counteroffensive began not with physical violence, but with a carefully orchestrated media campaign designed to destroy our credibility and portray our family as opportunistic frauds. A prominent cable news host questioned how an aircraft could remain undiscovered in a farm pond for 35 years, suggesting that our family had known about it all along and had only discovered it when we needed money for medical bills. A national newspaper ran a story highlighting my father's friendship with Richard Bennett, implying some deeper conspiracy. Social media platforms were flooded with manipulated photographs purporting to show our family members with known criminals. Most damaging was the emergence of a supposed witness, a former farm employee who claimed my grandfather had spoken of something valuable hidden in the pond decades ago. The man's story was riddled with inconsistencies and factual errors about our property, but that didn't stop it from spreading widely and creating exactly the cloud of doubt that Blackwood's allies had intended. This is their strategy, Reynolds explained during an emergency family meeting. They're trying to create enough public skepticism about the discovery to taint the evidence in the eyes of potential jurors. They don't need to prove you knew about the plane, they just need to create reasonable doubt about how it was discovered. But it's all lies, Laura protested, her hands shaking with a combination of anger and fear. We had no idea what was in that pond. We were just trying to solve a contamination problem. The truth doesn't always prevail in the court of public opinion, Martinez said gently, especially when powerful people are actively working to distort it. The Justice Department offered to issue a public statement clarifying the circumstances of our discovery and affirming our cooperation, but Reynolds advised against it. Engaging directly would only make your family more visible, he warned. Right now, your names aren't being used in official communications, which provides some thin layer of protection. A public defense would eliminate that. So we watched in silence as our integrity was questioned, our motives maligned, and our accidental discovery portrayed as a calculated scheme. The stress began to take a visible toll on all of us. My father, normally stoic and resilient, became withdrawn, spending hours staring at the drained pond basin as if seeking answers in the exposed earth. Larvae developed migraines from the constant tension. Even the children sensed the growing pressure, becoming clingy and anxious despite our efforts to shield them. Olivia, who had returned to her EPA position but remained in constant contact, called with an unexpected suggestion. "You need to change the narrative," she said during one of our secure video conferences. "Instead of being passive victims of this smear campaign, what if the farm became a symbol of something positive? Something so compelling that it would counter the negative portrayal without directly engaging with it." Her idea was both simple and radical: transform our security challenge into an opportunity for agricultural innovation. With federal agents constantly present on our property, why not leverage their presence to create something unprecedented? A model of high-security organic farming designed to protect both food safety and national security. The future of agriculture includes food security in both senses of the word, Olivia argued. Safe from contamination and safe from tampering or sabotage. Your farm could pioneer protocols that integrate physical security with organic practices, something that could benefit military installations, embassy compounds, even space missions eventually. The concept was intriguing. Rather than merely enduring the security measures as an imposition, we could incorporate them into a new agricultural vision, one that might eventually help other farmers facing different but related challenges. With Reynolds' cautious approval, we began working with Olivia and agricultural specialists from the Department of Agriculture to develop what we called the Secure Organic Protocol Initiative, SOPI. The program would document how security measures could be integrated with organic farming practices, creating systems that ensured both physical protection and environmental integrity. We installed transparent security fencing that doubled as support for climbing crops like beans and peas. Surveillance cameras were positioned to monitor both potential intruders and irrigation efficiency. Guard patrols were scheduled to coincide with optimal times for pest management observation. Even the secure communications system became a tool for precise crop monitoring and harvest coordination. Word of the initiative spread through agricultural circles, generating positive coverage in farming publications and scientific journals. Universities expressed interest in studying our integrated approach. The narrative began to shift from a family caught in a criminal investigation to innovative farmers developing cutting-edge agricultural security practices with potential global applications. Senator Blackwood's allies tried to counter this positive coverage, but their attacks seemed increasingly desperate and disconnected from the growing interest in our agricultural innovations. Their attempts to portray us as frauds collided with the reality of a family actively working to create something beneficial from their challenging circumstances. 10 weeks after Blackwood's indictment, as autumn painted our trees in brilliant colors, the forensic teams finally completed their work at the pond basin. The spring that had fed Cedar Pond for centuries continued flowing, its clear water now channeled temporarily into our irrigation system while the final preparations for refilling the pond were completed. Standing at the edge of the empty basin with Reynolds and Martinez, I felt a strange mixture of emotions: grief for what had been lost, hope for what might be restored, and pride in how our family had weathered the crisis. The structural engineers have reinforced the natural spring channel, Reynolds explained, pointing to subtle modifications that would actually improve water flow once the pond was refilled. And the environmental team has prepared the basin with native aquatic plants that will help establish a healthy ecosystem more quickly. When can we begin refilling? I asked, watching the spring water sparkle in the October sunlight. Tomorrow morning, Martinez replied. We've scheduled it for 8 o'clock a.m. The security team will establish a perimeter, but this is primarily a family event. Your father specifically requested that all of you be present to witness the restoration. The next morning dawned clear and cool, with just enough breeze to send golden leaves spiraling down from the maple trees surrounding the pond basin. Our family gathered at the edge, accompanied by Reynolds, Martinez, and a small team of federal agents maintaining a discreet security presence. My mother had been cleared to return from Philadelphia for this special occasion. Her cancer in remission, her strength gradually returning. She stood beside my father, their hands clasped tightly, both their faces reflecting the emotional significance of the moment. Emma and Liam bounced with excitement, having heard so many stories about the pond, but never having seen it filled with water. For them, the drained basin had only ever been a crime scene, a mysterious excavation surrounded by federal agents and equipment. Now they would witness its rebirth as the living heart of our farm. At precisely 8 a.m., the temporary channels diverting the spring water were removed. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, with a gentle burbling sound, crystal clear water began flowing into the lowest part of the basin, spreading outward in widening circles. "How long until it's completely full?" Liam asked, watching the water with fascination. "About 3 weeks," I explained, ruffling his hair. "The spring produces about 50 gallons per minute. That's almost 72,000 gallons a day flowing into the pond." "And the fish?" Emma asked. "When will they come back?" "The Department of Environmental Protection has a restocking program scheduled for spring," my father answered, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Bluegill bass, some native catfish. By next summer, it should be almost like it was before. Almost, but not quite. None of us would ever look at Cedar Pond again without remembering what had been hidden beneath its peaceful surface for 35 years. The aircraft was gone, the human remains respectfully removed for proper burial, the evidence secured in federal facilities. But the knowledge remained, the understanding that our family pond had concealed secrets of national significance, crimes that had shaped events beyond our quiet farm. As we watched the water levels slowly rise, Reynolds received a call that would add yet another dimension to our already extraordinary situation. "That was the Justice Department," he announced after a brief conversation. "Senator Blackwood has agreed to a plea deal. In exchange for reduced charges, he's providing evidence against other officials involved in the smuggling operation and subsequent cover-up. What does that mean for us?" Lavra asked, voicing the question uppermost in all our minds. "For our security situation? It significantly reduces certain threats," Reynolds explained. Blackwood was the central figure with the resources and connections to coordinate serious countermeasures against witnesses. With him cooperating, many of his allies will distance themselves from the case. "But not all threats," Martinez cautioned, ever the security professional. "There are still individuals connected to this case who operate outside traditional power, structures, people involved in the original smuggling operation who aren't concerned with legal proceedings because they've never operated within the law." Reynolds nodded in agreement. "We'll maintain security protocols, but we can begin scaling them back gradually as the risk assessment changes. Your family won't need the current level of protection indefinitely." It was another step toward normalcy. Another indication that eventually, not tomorrow or next week, but someday, our farm would be just a farm again. Our family would be known for our organic produce and innovative agricultural practices rather than for the criminal conspiracy we had accidentally uncovered. The sun climbed higher as we continued watching the pond gradually refill, the water catching the light and throwing it back in dancing patterns. Despite everything that had happened, the danger, the public scrutiny, the disruption to our lives, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for what remained intact. Our land, our family, our purpose. "Mr. Caldwell," Reynolds said quietly, stepping beside me at the pond's edge. "There's one more thing you should know. The Justice Department has processed the paperwork regarding the finder's fee for the recovered diamonds. The official amount is $12.6 million, to be held in escrow until all related cases are resolved, at which point it will be released to your family." The figure was still staggering, still difficult to fully comprehend. Enough to secure our farm's future for generations, to establish the agricultural trust we had envisioned, to create something lasting and meaningful from this extraordinary chapter in our family's history. We'll use it well, I said simply, watching the water continue its patient work of reclaiming the pond basin, for the land, for the future. 3 months later, as winter settled over western Pennsylvania with a blanket of pristine snow, Cedar Pond was completely refilled. Its surface had frozen into a perfect skating rink where Emma and Liam glided across the ice under the watchful eyes of 2 remaining security agents, who had become almost like extended family. The farm had settled into a new normal. Most of the federal teams had departed as the security threat diminished, leaving only a core protective detail that would remain until the last of the trials concluded. Our organic certification had been fully restored, with additional designations recognizing our pioneering work in agricultural security integration. The Secure Organic Protocol initiative had expanded beyond our expectations, with 3 universities now conducting research programs based on our methods, and the Department of Defense implementing similar approaches at several facilities where food production and security concerns intersected. My mother's health continued to improve, her strength returning with each passing day. My father had emerged from his period of withdrawal with renewed purpose, working with agricultural historians to document the farm's unique story for future generations. Laura had incorporated the security protocols into a comprehensive educational program for the children, turning our extraordinary circumstances into lessons about resilience, adaptation, and finding opportunity in adversity. Standing in my grandfather's study late one evening, reviewing plans for the Bennett Memorial Agricultural Trust that would be established once the finder's fee was released, I felt a deep connection to the generations of Caldwells who had faced their own challenges to preserve this land. Drought, economic depression, war. Each generation had confronted existential threats to the farm's survival and found ways to adapt and persevere. Our crisis had been unique. Few farmers discovered diamond-laden aircraft and international criminal conspiracies in their ponds, but our response reflected the same core values that had sustained the farm for over a century: resilience, innovation, and an unwavering commitment to the land. A gentle knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. It was Agent Martinez, her expression uncharacteristically relaxed. "I wanted to let you know that the final risk assessment has been completed," she said, handing me an official-looking document. "Beginning next month, we'll transition to passive security monitoring only. No visible agents, no patrol patterns. Your family can resume normal activities with minimal restrictions." It was the news we had been waiting for, the first real step toward reclaiming our lives fully. "Thank you," I said, realizing how inadequate the words were for everything she and her team had done to protect our family. Not just for the security, but for understanding what this farm means to us, for helping us continue being farmers even with everything else happening. Martinez smiled, a rare full smile that transformed her usually serious face. "Your family taught me something important, Mr. Caldwell. Security isn't just about physical safety, it's about protecting what gives life meaning, for your family. That's this land, this legacy. I'm honored to have been part of preserving it." As she left, I walked to the window overlooking the frozen pond, its surface glowing silver in the moonlight. The aircraft and its secrets were gone, the evidence dispersed to courtrooms and federal facilities across the country. But something profound remained, a deeper understanding of our connection to this land and its history, a renewed appreciation for the legacy we were preserving for future generations. We had drained our pond hoping to eliminate contamination and save our organic certification. Instead, we had uncovered crimes that had remained hidden for decades, exposed corruption at the highest levels of government, and placed our family in the crosshairs of dangerous and powerful people. But through that same discovery, we had found the resources to secure our farm's future permanently. We had pioneered innovative approaches to agricultural security that would benefit farmers worldwide. We had strengthened our family's bonds through shared adversity and common purpose. The pond that had concealed darkness for so many years now reflected moonlight and starlight, its surface alive with the laughter of children skating across the ice. In spring, it would teem with fish and aquatic plants. In summer, it would provide irrigation for our crops and a swimming hole for the next generation of Caldwells. The water had returned, the land had healed, and our family had emerged stronger than before, ready to write the next chapter in a story that had begun over a century ago when Thomas Caldwell first recognized the potential in this particular piece of Pennsylvania soil. Some might call our discovery luck good or bad depending on how you viewed the danger and disruption it had brought. But standing there watching the moonlight on the frozen pond, I knew it was something else entirely. It was the land itself revealing what it had protected for decades, choosing our family as the stewards of truth that had remained hidden for too long. We had drained a pond and found not just diamonds, but purpose, a renewed understanding of our responsibility to the land, to justice, and to the generations that would follow us. That was a discovery far more valuable than anything that could be measured in dollars, a legacy that would endure long after the last of the trials concluded and the final security agents departed. Cedar Pond reflected the stars once more, its surface unbroken, its secrets revealed, its waters cleansed and renewed. Like our family, it had weathered an extraordinary storm and emerged whole different, perhaps, but still fundamentally itself. Still the heart of a farm that had sustained 5 generations and would now, against all odds, sustain many more to come. 5 years later, July 2029, the morning sun painted golden streaks across the rows of organic tomatoes as I walked the eastern fields of Whispering Pines Farm. At my side, 16-year-old Emma studied the plants with the practiced eye of someone who had grown up understanding that farming was both science and art. Her tablet displayed real-time soil moisture readings from the advanced monitoring system that had become standard equipment on our operation. The irrigation cycles need adjustment in sections 3 and 4, she observed, pointing to subtle differences in leaf coloration that most people would never notice. The soil sensors show we're getting uneven distribution since last week's system update. I nodded, impressed by her attention to detail. Good catch. What would you recommend? Emma didn't hesitate. Increase duration by 12% in those sections while reducing flow rate by 8%. That should allow better absorption without wasting water. At 16, my daughter had developed an intuitive understanding of our land that had taken me years to achieve. Where I had learned farming through tradition and experience, Emma approached it with a perfect blend of scientific knowledge and deep connection to the soil that had supported our family for 5 generations. So much had changed in the 5 years since we drained Cedar Pond and discovered the sunken aircraft with its cargo of diamonds and deadly secrets. The security teams had departed 3 years ago, after the last of the major trials concluded with the conviction of former Defense Department official Thomas Harrington, the final high-ranking government figure implicated in the diamond smuggling operation. The pond itself had been fully restored, its crystal-clear waters once again supporting a thriving ecosystem of fish, plants, and wildlife. The spring that fed it flowed stronger than ever, the careful environmental remediation having actually improved its channel structure and water quality. But the most profound changes weren't visible to casual observers. They lay in how our family had transformed a potentially devastating crisis into an opportunity to reimagine what Whispering Pines Farm could be, not just for our generation, but for those that would follow. Dad, Liam's voice carried across the field as my 13-year-old son jogged toward us, tablet in hand. The university team is here for the quarterly monitoring. They've brought the new pollinator drones they want to test in the North Orchard. The Pennsylvania State University Agricultural Innovation Partnership had become a permanent fixture at our farm, using our operation as a living laboratory for sustainable farming technologies. What had begun as the Secure Organic Protocol Initiative, during our security crisis, had evolved into one of the most comprehensive agricultural research programs in the country. "Tell them we'll meet them at the main barn in 15 minutes, I replied, finishing my inspection of the tomato rows. "And ask your mother to join us. She wants to see the new drone capabilities." As Liam sprinted back toward the farmhouse, I felt the familiar surge of pride that came with witnessing my children embrace their heritage with such enthusiasm. Emma had already declared her intention to study agricultural engineering after high school, while Liam showed a remarkable talent for the business and marketing aspects of farming skills that complemented his sister's technical focus. Together, they represented the future of Whispering Pines Farm, a future that had seemed uncertain 5 years ago when our discovery had placed everything we valued at risk. "It's amazing how things turned out, isn't it?" Emma said quietly, seeming to read my thoughts as we walked back toward the barn. "Mom says it's like we needed to empty the pond to truly understand what this place means to us." Laura's wisdom continued to be the emotional compass that guided our family. Throughout the crisis, she had maintained unwavering faith that we would find a way through, not just to survive, but to emerge stronger and more purposeful than before. The university research team was setting up their equipment when we arrived at the barn, which had been transformed into a state-of-the-art agricultural technology center. Modern monitors and control systems shared space with 100-year-old hand tools, a physical representation of how we had integrated innovation with tradition. Dr. Amara Jenkins, the lead researcher for the pollinator drone program, greeted us with the familiarity of a longtime collaborator. "The Caldwell family, perfect timing. We've made significant improvements to the pollen distribution system since our last visit." She gestured towards several small drones that resembled mechanical bees, each about the size of a golf ball. "These new models can identify flowers at optimal pollination readiness and adapt their flight patterns to weather conditions. They're specifically designed to supplement natural pollinators, not replace them. This balance using technology to support natural systems rather than supplant them had become the defining philosophy of our operation." The Bennett Memorial Agricultural Trust, established with a portion of the $12.6 million finder's fee we had received for the diamonds, funded research specifically focused on technologies that worked in harmony with natural ecological processes. Laura joined us as Dr. Jenkins began demonstrating the drone's capabilities, her quick mind immediately grasping the implications for our apple and pear orchards. After 2 decades of marriage, I was still amazed by her ability to see connections and possibilities that others missed. Could these be programmed to identify early signs of fire blight in the blossoms? She asked, referring to the bacterial disease that occasionally threatened our fruit trees. "That would give us a tremendous advantage in preventing spread." Dr. Jenkins looked intrigued. "We hadn't considered that application, but it's absolutely feasible. The visual recognition system could be trained to spot the earliest symptoms. Would you be interested in participating in a development project?" This exchange typified how Whispering Pines Farm had evolved from a traditional family operation to an innovation hub where practical farming knowledge informed cutting-edge research, and new technologies were adapted to serve the timeless goals of sustainable land stewardship. As the morning progressed, I excused myself to prepare for an important meeting. The quarterly gathering of the Bennett Memorial Agricultural Trust Board would begin at noon, and as chairman, I needed to review the grant proposals before the other trustees arrived. Walking toward the farmhouse, I paused at the edge of Cedar Pond, its surface reflecting the summer sky in perfect mirror-like stillness. 5 years ago, this peaceful body of water had concealed secrets that had nearly destroyed everything we had built. Now it stood as a symbol of renewal and transformation. My father sat on the dock, fishing rod in hand, enjoying his retirement with the simple pleasures that had sustained generations of farmers. At 75, he had officially handed over management of the farm 3 years ago, though he remained an invaluable source of wisdom and historical knowledge. "Catching anything?" I asked, joining him on the weathered wooden planks. He smiled, the deep lines in his face evidence of a lifetime working under the sun. "Just enjoying the quiet. Fish aren't particularly cooperative today." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching a blue heron stalk the shallows at the pond's edge. "Sometimes I still can't believe what we found down there," Dad said finally, nodding toward the clear water. "How different everything might have been if Olivia hadn't detected that contamination." The discovery had indeed altered the trajectory of our family and our farm in ways no one could have predicted. The criminal conspiracy we'd accidentally exposed had led to the conviction of 27 individuals, including 3 former government officials, 4 corporate executives, and members of organized crime families in 3 countries. The trials had made international headlines, with our family's name inextricably linked to one of the most significant corruption cases of the decade. But while the legal proceedings had eventually concluded, the positive changes catalyzed by our discovery continued to unfold. "The final grant applications are in for this quarter's funding cycle," I told him, changing the subject to the present. 22 proposals from small family farms across Pennsylvania, all focused on sustainable innovations. The trust will be able to fund at least 15 of them. The Bennett Memorial Agricultural Trust had become my father's primary focus in retirement. Named for his friend Richard Bennett, the federal witness who had died in the plane crash. In our pond, the trust supported family farms throughout the state, providing grants for sustainable farming initiatives, technological innovation, and educational programs. "Richard would have appreciated the irony," Dad observed, reeling in his line to check the bait. That the diamonds being smuggled by the people who killed him ended up preserving the very family farms he loved. It was a profound truth. The finder's fee for the diamonds' money that had originated in criminal enterprise had been transformed into a force for good, supporting the values that Bennett himself had cherished. "The latest funding round includes a young couple in Lancaster County," I continued. "First-generation farmers converting a conventional dairy operation to organic practices. Their proposal includes innovative rotational grazing systems that could become a model for the region." Dad's eyes lit up with the same passion that had sustained him through decades of agricultural challenges. "Send me their application. I'd like to visit their operation, maybe offer some guidance based on our transition experience." This mentorship aspect had become an unexpected benefit of the trust, creating a network of family farms that shared knowledge, resources, and mutual support. What had begun as a financial endowment had evolved into a community of like-minded agricultural stewards, working to preserve family farming for future generations. As noon approached, I left Dad to his fishing and headed to the renovated carriage house that now served as the Trust's headquarters. The building, dating from the early 1900s, had been carefully restored with its historic character intact, while the interior had been transformed into a modern meeting facility equipped with advanced communication technology. The trustees were already gathering, a diverse group that included agricultural economists, environmental scientists, successful family farmers, and community leaders. Among them was Olivia, who had left her EPA position 3 years ago to become the Trust's executive director, bringing her scientific expertise and administrative skills to the organization full-time. "The quarterly financial report is ready," she informed me, handing over a tablet with the latest figures. "The endowment has grown 8% since last quarter, which means we can increase grant funding by approximately $230,000 for the next cycle." The Trust's financial management had been one of Olivia's most significant contributions. Under her guidance, the initial $8 million endowment, The portion of the finder's fee allocated to the trust had grown to over $11 million through careful investment, while simultaneously distributing nearly $3 million in grants to family farms. Throughout Pennsylvania, the meeting proceeded efficiently, with the board reviewing and approving grants for innovative irrigation systems, solar power installations, advanced composting facilities, and educational programs designed to encourage young people to pursue careers in sustainable agriculture. As we concluded the formal business, I shared some news that would further expand the trust's impact. The Sustainable Farming Initiative has approached us about establishing a national version of our grant program. They're prepared to contribute, matching funds that would allow us to support family farms across the country, not just in Pennsylvania. The proposal generated enthusiastic discussion. What had begun as our family's way of creating something positive from a dangerous and disruptive experience could potentially evolve into a national model for preserving family farming through innovation and sustainability. This is exactly what we envisioned, Olivia said as the meeting adjourned. Using what we discovered to create something larger than ourselves, something that will continue growing and evolving long after we're gone. Her words captured the philosophy that had guided our decisions since that fateful summer day, when we drained Cedar Pond. Rather than being defined by the criminal conspiracy we'd accidentally exposed, we had chosen to be defined by what we created in response to it. The afternoon sun was beginning its westward descent as I walked back toward the farmhouse. The central portion dated back to 1902, when Thomas Caldwell had established the farm, with additions from each subsequent generation reflecting changing needs and growing prosperity. Laura was in the kitchen, coordinating with the caterers who would provide dinner for the 40 guests expected at this evening's event, the annual Whispering Pines Farm Innovation Showcase. This gathering had become a highlight of the agricultural calendar, bringing together farmers, researchers, policymakers, and food industry representatives to experience firsthand the sustainable practices and technologies being developed and implemented at our farm. The governor's office confirmed she'd be attending. Laura informed me, checking items off her list with characteristic efficiency. And the PBS documentary crew will arrive at 4 to set up for interviews. The documentary, Hidden Depths: How a Farm Pond Changed American Agriculture, would tell the story of how our accidental discovery had catalyzed a revolution in sustainable farming practices. The producers had spent months filming at our farm and interviewing people connected to both the criminal case and the agricultural innovations that had followed. "Are you ready for your interview?" Laura asked, knowing my discomfort with media attention even after 5 years of public interest in our story. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied with a rueful smile. "I still think you should be the one on camera. You're much better at explaining what we're trying to accomplish here." Laura laughed, the sound as warm and reassuring as it had been when we first met nearly 2 decades ago. "They want the farmer, not the farmer's wife. Besides, you've gotten much better at articulating our vision. Just speak from the heart like you always do." Her confidence in me had been my anchor throughout the tumultuous years following our discovery. When federal agents had filled our home, when media reports had questioned our integrity, when threats had forced us into protective custody, Laura's unwavering belief that we would find a way through had sustained all of us. By 6 o'clock, the farm was transformed for the showcase event. The large event tent erected near Cedar Pond glowed with warm lighting as guests began to arrive. Interactive displays demonstrated the innovative technologies being developed and tested on our property. Local chefs prepared dishes using produce from our fields, demonstrating the connection between sustainable farming practices and exceptional food quality. Governor Eleanor Martinez, formerly Agent Martinez of the U.S. Marshals Service, who had led our security detail during the investigation, arrived to considerable attention. After leaving federal service, she had entered politics. with a platform focused on environmental protection and support for family farms, winning the governorship the previous year. The Caldwell family, she greeted us warmly, the formality of her security days replaced by genuine friendship. Your showcase gets more impressive every year. We've had exceptional support from your administration, I acknowledged, referring to the state agricultural initiatives she had championed since taking office. The new tax incentives for sustainable farming practices have made a tremendous difference for small operations throughout Pennsylvania. Those incentives were inspired by what you've accomplished here, she replied. You've proven that family farms can be both environmentally responsible and economically viable. That's a powerful model for agricultural policy. As the evening progressed, I found myself drawn to Cedar Pond, stepping away from the busy showcase for a moment of reflection. The surface of the water glowed with the reflected lights from the event tent, creating a magical atmosphere that belied its once dark secrets. Reynolds, now Deputy Director of the FBI's Criminal Investigation Division, joined me at the pond's edge. Despite his promotion and increased responsibilities, he made time each year to attend our showcase, maintaining the connection forged during those intense months of investigation and protection. 5 years, he said quietly, looking out over the water. Sometimes it feels like yesterday we were pulling that aircraft from the mud. And sometimes it feels like a different lifetime, I added. Like something that happened to someone else. Reynolds nodded in understanding. That's often how it is with life-changing events. They create a dividing line before and after that. Separates different versions of ourselves. The observation was profound in its simplicity. There was indeed a before and after to our family story, before the pond draining that had exposed decades-old crimes, and after the transformation that had followed. But unlike many such dividing lines in people's lives, ours had ultimately led to something better, something more meaningful than what had existed before. Your family did something remarkable, Reynolds continued. Most people who accidentally stumble into dangerous situations like yours focus solely on getting back to normal, returning to exactly what they had before. You chose a different path, using what happened as a catalyst for creating something new and better. His words captured what I had come to understand over the past 5 years. The true legacy of our discovery wasn't the exposure of crimes or the recovery of diamonds. It was what we had built afterward, the innovations, the trust, the community of farmers working together to preserve a way of life that balanced tradition with progress. As we walked back toward the showcase event, Emma approached with a young woman I didn't recognize, a college-aged student with an earnest expression and a notebook in hand. Dad, this is Sophia Bennett, Emma introduced us. She's Richard Bennett's granddaughter. She's studying agricultural economics at Cornell. The connection took a moment to register. Richard Bennett, the federal witness who had died in the plane crash. My father's friend whose remains had lain hidden in our pond for 35 years, had a granddaughter who was now standing before me, alive and vibrant and pursuing a field connected to the values her grandfather had cherished. Ms. Bennett, I managed, extending my hand. It's an honor to meet you. The honor is mine, Mr. Caldwell, she replied with quiet dignity. Your family established the trust that's funding my education. And more importantly, you helped bring justice for my grandfather after so many years. I learned that Sophia had been born several years after her grandfather's disappearance, growing up with the painful mystery of what had happened to him. The discovery in our pond had finally provided answers, allowing her family to properly mourn and find closure. After decades of uncertainty, I never knew him, she explained as we walked toward the main showcase displays, but my father always said he loved the land and believed in preserving family farms. When I heard about the trust named in his honor, it felt like a way to connect with his values, to continue something that mattered to him. The moment crystallized everything our family had experienced over the past 5 years, The danger and disruption. Yes, but also the unexpected connections and opportunities to create meaning from what could have been merely a tragedy. Richard Bennett's legacy lived on not just in the trust that bore his name, but in his granddaughter who embodied the values he had championed. As the evening's formal program began, I found myself called to the podium to deliver remarks as host of the showcase. Looking out over the gathered crowd, farmers and researchers, government officials and community members, all united by a shared commitment to sustainable agriculture, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought us to this moment. 5 years ago, our family faced a crisis. I began, departing from my prepared remarks.